Snow blew in hard, horizontal lines across the valley, scouring the white surface until sky and ground smeared into the same blinding glare. Engines ticked and pinged as they cooled behind shattered armor. Somewhere in the torn-up bowl of snow and rock, a man groaned and tried to drag himself closer to cover, leaving a thin red smear that was bright even against all that white. The next shot ended that. The round punched into the snow inches from his hand, close enough that the blast of displaced powder slapped his fingers and made him jerk back. It didn't hit him. It didn't need to. He froze, face buried in his sleeve, lungs seizing, every cell in his body finally understanding what his brain had been denying for the last 5 minutes. Whoever held that rifle on the ridge owned him. Everyone knew it now. Stay down, stay down. Lieutenant Reyes barked, voice raw in the cramped net of local radios. Nobody pops above waist unless you want ventilation. Cade, talk to me. I'm here, Sergeant Cade replied, breath loud in his mic. Third squad stuck behind the lead wagon. 1 Kia in the turret, 2 wounded inside. That bastard's walking rounds down the hood like he's painting it. Another shot cracked, sharp and flat. Snow dusted off the side of a rock where one of Cade's men had just been peeking. He flinched backward. It wasn't random fire. Every time someone lifted anything higher than a helmet rim, a round answered. No correction, no wasted shots, just that instant punishment. From their shallow cover, the soldiers could see nothing but white slopes, jagged rock, and the dark mouths of gullies. No flash, no smoke, just the effect. The convoy had stopped almost dead center in the valley, where the snow lay smooth and deceptively untouched. The lead armored vehicle now sat half-buried, its front end lifted on a twisted undercarriage where the buried charge had gone off. At the rear, a wall of churned snow and blasted rock marked where a mortar round had bracketed them. On 3 sides, ridges rose up steep, forming a wide, shallow bowl. Beautiful terrain for a postcard. Perfect terrain for a kill zone. Machine gun, left ridge, someone shouted. A heavier stutter rolled out from the left flank, cutting across the valley like a saw. Bullets chewed a spray of chips off the stone above Reyes's head. He flattened, teeth grinding, snow soaking through his gloves as he dug in. You see it, he snapped. Negative, came one reply. It's behind something. RPG right, another voice warned. A rocket hissed from the opposite ridge and streaked overhead, warhead wobbling slightly as it hunted for its doomed arc. It smacked into the disabled lead vehicle with a flat, vicious thump that reverberated through the valley, punching another gout of flame and black smoke into the white world. Ortiz, get me higher, Reyes shouted, pressing his helmet closer to the handset clipped inside it. I want birds overhead or something dropping on that ridge 5 minutes ago. Inside the signals truck, Specialist Ortiz hunched over his radio suite, face lit in flickering greens. He twisted knobs and toggled switches with the desperation of a man trying to tune in the last lifeboat off a sinking ship. Long range is trash, sir, he replied, jaw clenched. I had brigade for a second, and then he tapped his headset as a burst of static squealed and then went flat. They just slammed something on top of us. Wideband. I'm getting ghosts and hiss. Punch through it. I'm trying to, but it's... Ortiz stopped, listening to the meaningless wash of noise filling his ears. They know exactly what they're jamming. Another shot cracked across the snow. A helmet lying on its side, 3 meters away, leapt up as if kicked, and then rolled, a neat hole punch straight through its crown. The soldier who dropped it swallowed hard and pressed himself deeper into the shallow scrape he'd carved with his boots. Smoke grenades bloomed gray in the valley, thrown by shaking hands from behind rocks and wheels. They hissed and spread, veiling the angles of the ridges in shifting curtains. For a heartbeat, the valley looked softer, edges blurred. Then more shots lashed through the smoke, answering every shadow with contempt. Rounds snapped and whined, adjusting effortlessly for wind and cover. The unseen sniper rode the gusts like he'd lived here his whole life, like he'd rehearsed this moment. Nobody moves for the medic? A voice demanded, choked with frustration. No one answered, because everyone had already tried. The medic lay out in the open, maybe 20 meters from cover, beside a rifleman who had bled a wide crimson stain under his torso. They'd gone down in the first few minutes, when the platoon still thought they could sprint through the kill zone in pairs, trading speed for survival. The sniper had made his opinion of that idea very clear. For bodies now dotted the route between the medic and the safety of the rocks. All of them people who had believed, for 1 second, that they were fast enough. Reyes risked a glance over the broken edge of his cover. A chunk of rock vanished where his eyes had just been. He fell back with a curse. Long-range support is off the table until we get coordinates, he said into the net, voice tight. Air is not flying into an unknown gun. Ground is not walking into it either. We are alone in this valley. Silence hummed over the channel for a moment, filled only by the distant thump of yet another mortar round landing short and the steady hiss of wind. No one can reach him from here, Reyes muttered, mostly to himself, but the mic caught it. Not with this terrain. The words sat in the net like a verdict. Cade, pressed against a blackened wheel with snow melting on his cheeks, stared at the ridgeline and ground his teeth. He's got crossfire, he said, and he's not working alone. That MG is covering his blind spots. RPGs are bracketing. This is layered. This is a teaching slide. And with the red icons, someone answered bitterly. Another lull fell, thin and brittle, like the air itself. In that pause, with no shells falling and no rifles cracking, the valley sounded almost peaceful. Wind combed the ridges. Loose snow drifted. Somewhere, metal creaked as it cooled. A voice, calmer than it should have been, broke into the silence. Whisper 3. If you're out there, someone on the net said quietly, almost like it was a joke or a prayer meant only for themselves. We need eyes on that ridge. Anyone? There was a crackle, a hiss. Static flared, then faded. And then a woman's voice came through, clean and even, like she was sitting in a warm room instead of surrounded by all that killing ground. Whisper 3 copies, she said. Mark your last contact. Reyes blinked. For a second, he thought he'd imagined it. Ortiz looked up from his failing radio suite, eyes wide. Cade stared down at the handset pressed against his cheek, as if it had just spoken in some dead language. Out beyond the valley, on some distant slope they couldn't yet see, gloved fingers settled more firmly around a rifle stock. A cheek pressed into a cold comb. A small, folded range card, edges softened from use, lay clipped against the stock, the ink on it smudged but still legible. Say again, Whisper 3, Reyes said slowly, as if the wrong word might scare the voice away. You have position on that ridge? Negative, she replied. Not yet, but I see your bowl. I see your smoke. I see where they think you can't move. A pause, barely a breath. We'll fix that. They still couldn't see her. Only the suggestion of a silhouette against a far-off line of rock, more shadow than figure. No face, no patch, just a presence on the net that hadn't been there a moment ago. In a valley where no one could reach the sniper, someone had just answered to a name most of them thought belonged to a story. Hours earlier, the valley had looked harmless. The day began with a pale blue sky over a snow-choked pass, the sun a weak, distant coin behind thin cloud. Vehicles idled in a rough line beside a cluster of prefabricated buildings, their exhaust plumes turning to ghost-white trails in the brittle cold. Diesel fumes mingled with coffee steam and the sharp, clean smell of fresh snow. Inside a hasty briefing tent, the air was warmer, thick with breath and damp wool. A portable generator hummed near the flap, powering a battered laptop and a projector that splashed satellite imagery onto a sheet strung as a screen. The mission profile is straightforward, the signals captain said, tapping with a gloved finger at the image of the mountains. We escort the team in this truck here. He indicated the boxy shape of the signals vehicle to the relay node at grid here. The projected map zoomed. A small array of dishes appeared, perched on a narrow ridge like metal flowers drinking the sky. That relay keeps our drone feeds stitched over this entire slice of the border, the captain continued. It's the backbone for secure long-range traffic in and out of this sector. If it goes down, we start losing eyes, ears, and coordination. Patrols go blind. Air has to improvise. It's not good. In the second row, standing slightly off to one side, Corporal Hana Iqbal listened and said nothing. Her hood was up, casting a shadow over her eyes. A scarf covered her mouth and nose, the fabric patterned in a dull, broken white to match the snow. Her rifle leaned against her leg, its barrel wrapped in strips of cloth and tape. The stock bore a thin, laminated card covered in small numbers written in neat, careful handwriting. While the captain talked, she ran her fingers over the weapon, checking contact points, sling attachment, barrel crown, turrets. It was a ritual more than a necessity. She knew every mark on that rifle. She knew which scratches came from training, which from real missions, which from that one day she tried not to think about, but never stopped feeling. Route in is this pass here, then we come along the valley floor, the captain said, highlighting a wide white bowl between ridges. We've had contact in neighboring valleys, but this one has been quiet. Some probing fire against the relay itself, nothing precise. Because the relay's not moving, someone muttered. A few snickers answered. Sergeant Cade, near the front, leaned back in his folding chair and stretched his legs, boots creaking. So were the lucky ones taking the nerds to their antenna farm, he said. Outstanding. Ortiz, hunched over a small portable radio testing kit at the back, blew on his hands and frowned as digits froze on a small screen. I swear, if this thing freezes up on me at altitude, I'm filing a complaint with the weather. Hannah's gaze wasn't on the joking. She watched the map. The valley floor looked smooth, almost gentle, a white corridor between the gray of the ridges. But her eyes went to the edges where the contour lines pinched tight. Question, she said, voice low but cutting through the murmur. This ridgeline to the north here. She stepped closer, raising a hand. What's the gradient on that narrow chute? Her finger traced a faint, pale line where snow seemed to pour down between two teeth of rock. The captain glanced at his notes. Too steep to matter. Another NCO answered before the captain could. It's basically ice. No route, no trail. No one's going up that unless they're a mountain goat with a death wish. Cade smirked over his shoulder. Iqbal, you planning on free climbing the battlefield now? Leave some heroics for the rest of us. She let the jab slide past. Copy, she said simply, but her eyes lingered on the chute. In the projected image, it looked like a silver scar. The briefing moved on. A slide appeared showing likely jamming scenarios, frequencies highlighted in red. Intelligence suggests they've been experimenting with cheap, portable jammers, the captain said. Range is limited, but if they park one on a hill with line of sight, they can chew up long-range trade pretty effectively. Stay flexible. Short-range handsets will still work. Most of the room nodded. Ortiz sighed, already imagining the headaches. Hannah looked at the slide a little longer than the others. The idea of a valley where long-range support went dark in units had only their own voices stayed with her. When the briefing ended, chairs scraped back. Helmets went on. Gloves were tugged tight. The platoon spilled out into the cold, boots crunching in the snow. Outside, Cade fell into step beside Hannah as they walked toward the vehicles. You keep looking at that chute like you've got a date with it, he said, knocking his shoulder lightly against hers. Trying out for the mountaineering team now. If you were a sniper up there, she asked him, nodding toward the mountains, and you wanted a position where no one in the valley could see you, where would you go? Sniper? Cade scoffed. We've had some pot shots and a few wannabes. You heard Ortiz. Nothing serious. Just ghost stories about some ridge gun that plinked at a patrol once and ran away. He grinned. Besides, that's what you're for. Counter sniper, right? Golden bullet and all that. Don't try to steal the machine gunner's thunder with climbing tricks. She gave him a sideways look. Golden bullet. The words tasted bitter. That what they call it now? He caught the tone and winced slightly. Hey, I didn't mean... I know, she said. Relax. In the warmth of the armored vehicle, later, with the engine rumbling beneath, Cade tried again, leaning back on a crate. The cramped compartment smelled of oil, damp gear, and instant coffee. You know, I was kidding back there, right? He said. About the golden bullet. We're way past that. She stared out the small ballistic window at the lines of the mountains moving by. Back with your old unit, he went on, quieter. That village. I heard something about a shot that changed your career path. Just talk. People talk. You don't have to. Her jaw tightened. Her gloved hands worked a cleaning cloth over a part of her rifle that didn't need it. Some days, she said at last, you get to choose between your team and a stranger. Some days you don't manage to save either the way you want to. He fell silent, looking at her profile in the dim light. The vehicle rocked gently as it followed the track. Anyway, he said eventually, forcing a lighter tone, you'll be behind glass today, not in some alley. Open field, clean lines, no surprises. Outside, the convoy wound along the road that snaked into the mountains. Wind-carved drifts rose on either side like frozen waves. Rocky spines jutted up, dark and jagged, the snow clinging to them in patches. The wide bowl of the valley appeared ahead, deceptively gentle, its flanks folding up in smooth, white arcs. They passed a pair of local herders in heavy coats in the distance, figures small against the snow, animals clustered around them like moving stones. One of the soldiers lifted a hand in a half-hearted wave. The distant figure lifted a hand slowly in return. The moral geometry of the place seemed simple from this distance. Uniforms and rifles on one side, wool and quiet lives on the other. No one saw the glint from a scope on a ridge an hour away, tracking the column's progression with patient, professional interest. By the time the convoy rolled down into the bowl, the sun stood higher, glare sharpening, shadows shortening. What had looked like a hollow on the map now was a wide expanse of snow that rose gently to meet the base of the ridges. A few outcroppings of rock broke the surface here and there, offering the promise of cover that might or might not be worth the sprint it took to reach them. Looks like a postcard, Ortiz said in the signals truck, wiping a circle of clarity on the fogging window. Yeah, Cade muttered, watching the flanks through his own narrow view. The kind you send home before it all goes to hell. On one of the rear benches, Hana was already counting the seconds it would take to move between pieces of cover, the fall lines of bullets, the possible arcs from the ridges. She watched the snow surface carefully, looking for any wrongness, a line, a shadow, a pattern that didn't fit. Hold, Reyes said over the net. Plateau ahead. We slow through the center, watch those edges. Cade, third squad on overwatch. Iqbal glassed those ridges. Copy, Hana replied, lifting her rifle and nestling the optic against her eye. She scanned the left ridge first, then the right, then the far end where the valley seemed to pinch. Rocks, wind, spurs of ice. Nothing that screamed danger, but the feeling crawled between her shoulder blades anyway. Sir, a private in the lead vehicle said suddenly. You see that line? Right ahead. The snow. It looks weird. The valley floor, smooth as poured milk, bore a faint, unnatural seam no more than a few inches wide, running perpendicular to their path. It could have been an old ski track half blown in. It could have been anything. Reyes opened his mouth to order a halt. The buried charge went off. The explosion erupted under the lead vehicle with a flat, shattering roar, flipping the front end upward and hurling a wave of snow and shrapnel outward in a dirty blossom. The blast slapped the air out of lungs and shattered the quiet. In the rear vehicles, soldiers ducked instinctively as the shock wave rattled armor and teeth. Contact front, someone screamed. Before the snow from the first explosion even finished falling back to the ground, a mortar round came in at the rear, slamming into the track and blowing a wall of snow and rock into the air behind the last vehicle. The convoy was boxed in. Classic bracketing. Textbook kill zone. The turret gunner on the lead armored vehicle struggled to right himself, swearing, trying to bring his weapon around toward where he thought the threat might be. The first sniper shot cracked down from the ridge and took him in the exposed part of his chest plate, spinning him backward into the hatch. His body slumped half in, half out, weapons swinging uselessly. Sniper! Sniper! Voices shouted, overlapping, panicked. Machine gun bursts opened up from the left ridge, chewing lines into the snow between the vehicles. On the right, the distinctive hiss and roar of a rocket sounded, followed by the impact on armor. Ortiz grabbed his handset. Saber actual, this is Saber 2-1, troops in contact, grid. Static screamed in his ears, drowning his words. The long-range radio's signal strength indicator dropped like a stone. They just lit us up, he said. Sir, their jammer's live. It's right on top of our frequency. I can't get out. Try again, Reyes ordered, dropping behind a chunk of rock as snow spat up around him. I am. Ortiz snapped, fingers white on his controls. All he heard was a rising, falling hiss, like an ocean in his helmet. Hana and her spotter, wedged behind the wheel of the second vehicle, dropped prone and pushed their rifle barrels through a narrow gap under the axle. They scanned the ridges through the remaining slivers of glass. Looking for Flash, the spotter said, breath frosting against his scarf. Nothing, Hana replied. He's not dumb enough to stand in the open. He's firing from inside cover or from an angle we can't see. The ridges gave nothing back, just rock, snow, and the occasional puff where the sniper's rounds hit near the convoy. The angle was wrong. From down here, their view of the upper slopes was truncated, cut off by the curvature of the valley. The shooter had chosen his nest with geometry in mind. A rifleman yelled as a round took him in the thigh while he tried to crawl from one vehicle to the next. He collapsed into the snow, screaming. The medic broke cover low and fast, kit bouncing against his side. Stay down, Reyes roared. Not leaving him. The medic snapped, half to himself, diving toward the casualty. He never made it. 2 rounds hit within inches of his hands, one on either side, chopping snow into his face and forcing him flat. He lay there, pinned beside the wounded man, caught in a field of invisible crosshairs. Smoke forward, Reyes ordered. Suppress both ridges. Grenades landed and belched clouds of gray, curling upward, trying to break the lines of sight. Squad automatic weapons chattered, sending arcs of rounds blindly into likely positions. The sniper's reply came, precise as ever, now simply drilling through the smoke instead of clear air. It made no difference. The angles were his. The platoon's own light mortar team scrambled to set up on a patch of ground that looked marginally flat. The base plate sank into hidden, soft snow as soon as the first round dropped. The shot went wild, detonating somewhere useless, and on the second try the tube kicked and nearly toppled as the recoil fought the unstable footing. Base plates slipping, the assistant gunner shouted, shoving snow with his gloved hands, fingers numb. Fix it or fall back. Reyes barked. Above them, enemy mortar rounds bracketed closer with hateful precision, guided by someone who clearly had a perfect view. Each detonation forced the platoon deeper behind their fragile cover, reducing their options one explosion at a time. Hana watched the ridges, feeling the beginnings of dread coil in her chest. She knew the angles. She could feel them like lines drawn in the air. From where they lay, their fire reached only so far up the slopes before the earth itself blocked their view. Anyone clever enough to occupy the right slice of higher ground could shoot down into the bowl while remaining invisible. We can't see him because we're stuck in the wrong bowl, she said quietly. Great, her spotter replied. We'll make sure to put that on the complaint form. Another voice cut into the net, warped and broken by interference. Saber actual, this is Avalanche. Your grid, say again, over. Say again, Avalanche, you're broken, Ortiz said, leaning close to his mic, hand cupped over his mouth as if that could keep the jamming out. We are in. His words dissolved again, swallowed by noise. Between bursts of static, fragments slipped through. Contact snipers need coordinates cannot commit without. And then nothing. Air's not coming without a target, Reyes relayed grimly. And we can't give them one. That valley floor might as well be a coffin. Through her scope, Hana swept past the wrecked lead vehicle, over the sprawled bodies, toward the signals truck. In the rippling distortions of heat and smoke, she caught something. A dark shape sliding between drifts at the far edge of the bowl. Another behind it. They were moving low, using the platoon's own chaos as cover. They're not just shooting for bodies, she said. Look near the truck. Assessing. She saw them again. A small group, better equipped than the usual skirmishers, making deliberate progress toward the signals vehicle. One carried a hard-sided case slung across his back, not like a weapon, but like a tool. Not explosive. Containment. They're coming for the relay, she said into the net. They want what's inside that truck. Outstanding, Ortiz muttered. They're trying to steal my job. Another attempt to reach the medic ended in panicked shouts as rounds pinned down the would-be rescuers. Snow around the bodies kicked and danced as bullets chewed into it. The medic raised his head a fraction, eyes wild, and then flinched as a round stripped the fuzzy edge off his hood. Reyes pressed his forehead against the rock. The skin there felt cold and hot at once. No one moves for that man until we deal with that gun, he said, forcing each word. Nobody dies trying to save another body for him to shoot. You understand me. Silence answered him, heavy and bitter. He looked up at the ridges again, squinting against the glare. Somewhere up there, in a niche they couldn't see, someone was watching them through a scope, calm and steady, taking their time. No one down here can reach that angle, Reyes said. Not from the valley floor. We're playing on his board. Snow hissed as a fresh squall started to blow in. Fine crystals swirling like smoke, rejecting their presence. The valley seemed to close around them. Somewhere beyond those ridges, on a line of rock dismissed as too steep to matter, someone else listened to the chaos spill through a handset. Under fire, against every drilled instinct to stay pressed into cover until someone else solved the problem, Hana chose to move. The decision didn't come in a grand flash of courage. It arrived in small things. The tight hiss in Reyes's voice when he said no one could reach the gun, the ragged breaths breaking through the medic's attempts at professionalism over the net, the slow creep of the assault team toward the truck carrying the only thing that might keep their side from being blindsided for months. I have an option, she said, voice level, sliding her rifle's bolt back to check the chamber. It's not in the book. Iqbal, this is not the moment for creativity, Reyes snapped. We stick to. There's a chute, she cut in. North Ridge. Steeper than you like. No trail, no cover except what you make while you're on it. It's the only way up behind them that isn't covered by their current arcs. That ice scar. Kay demanded. You want to climb that under fire? If he's where I think he is, I can enfilade his position and his support from the backside, she said. From a bowl, you can't see him. From above, you can. Too risky, Reyes said automatically. Staying here is a slower kind of suicide, she replied. Sir, they're closing on the relay. In 10 minutes, they'll be in that truck. In 15, they'll have pulled something we probably don't want in their hands. Even if we survive this valley, we'll be fighting what they do with that data for months. He knew she was right. He also knew what it meant to send one person out of cover, alone, against a sniper who'd already proved he could hit anything that moved. We send a team, they die together, he said. We send no one, we die in pieces. Send me, she said simply. Alone. Less movement for him to track. I'll use your suppressive fire as cover. What makes you think you'll make it 20 meters? Someone demanded, anger born of fear. I don't, she said, but I know I won't if I stay at this angle. The net went quiet. Cade's teeth clenched. He knew that tone. He'd heard it once before the shot in the village square that had rippled through her career and their gossip. This is against protocol, Reyes said at last, the words slow and heavy. You break from the main body under this kind of fire, and there's no guarantee we can cover you. I'm not asking for guarantees, she said. I'm asking for 30 seconds of everything you've got on both ridges when I move. Ortiz, inside his metal cave of failing radios, knew better than to weigh in. But he did anyway. Sir, he said, voice low, if she can get eyes on that jammer, we might get long range back long enough to bring someone who isn't stuck in this bowl. Right now, we're shouting into the void. Reyes closed his eyes briefly, a flurry of snow tapping against his lids. Fine, he said quietly. Iqbal, you're cleared. You move on my mark. You do not wait for permission to fall back. If it looks impossible, you abort. You don't get yourself killed trying to play hero. Understood. Understood, she said. And Hana, he added, using her name for once, haltingly. Don't make me write another report with your name in the last paragraph. A short breath that might have been a laugh crackled over the net. I'll do my best. She tightened her sling, tucked her rifle tight against her body, and looked at Cade. His face was pale under the grime. You're out of your mind, he said. Probably, she replied. Cover me anyway. He nodded, and his jaw set in that way he had when it was time to stop talking. On my mark, Reyes said. 3, 2, 1. Now. All guns, left and right. Make it loud. The valley exploded anew. Automatic weapons roared. Grenades detonated. Rounds stitched lines into rock and snow. Smoke and dust and powder mixed into a chaotic, shifting wall. Hana broke from cover in that chaos, running low, boots punching through crusted snow. Bullets snapped somewhere behind her, chasing the ghost of her as she zigzagged between the hulk of a truck and a jut of rock. She slid on her side under a twisted fender, snow burning cold against her gear, then burst out again, legs pumping. The sniper tried to track her, but there were too many moving pieces now, too much noise. Even a master could be saturated. Lima from 3rd Squad lifted his head an inch too high and paid for it with a round that cracked a section of his helmet. But Hana stayed below that line, trusting her calculation and the margins. She reached the base of the chute with lungs on fire and forearms burning from the sprints. Up close, the ice looked worse than on the satellite image. It rose like a frozen waterfall, irregular and fractured, slabs of snow hanging over polished blue-gray surfaces. Patches of rock stuck through like broken teeth. It was beautiful in a way, and utterly unforgiving. She slung her rifle diagonally across her back, securing it tight so it wouldn't swing and throw her off balance. Her gloves, already wet, squeaked against the ice as she tested holds. Every instinct screamed that this was a terrible idea. That instinct didn't have a better one. Beginning climb, she reported, breath gusting white. Don't shoot at this side of the ridge. Copy, Reyes replied. There was nothing else to say. She started up. The first few meters were clumsy, boots searching for purchase, shoulders and hips scrubbing against rock. Snow dusted down over her as she disturbed the fragile equilibrium of the chute. The valley sounds dimmed quickly. Gunfire became a muffled roar from below, distant thunder. Up here, the closer sound was her own breathing and the soft crackle of ice shifting under her weight. Halfway up, a new squall swept over the ridge. Wind knifed into her, flinging stinging crystals against her face. Visibility dropped, the world narrowing to the ice in front of her. The same storm that made her a harder target below, now, tried to pry her off the mountain. She placed her boot on what looked like a solid ledge. The snow under it slumped, and the ice slab it covered tilted with a groan. She threw her weight sideways, scrabbling for another hold as the loosened chunks slid down beneath her, bouncing and shattering, crashing into the rocks at the base with a sound that carried like a gunshot. Status, Kay demanded over the net, voice tight. Still climbing, she grunted, wedging her fingers into a crack. Try not to shake the world for a minute. The sniper on the opposing ridge must have heard the falling ice. A round smacked into the rock a meter from her hip, spraying her with shards. Tiny fragments cut into the exposed skin beside her eye. One skip-striking piece kissed her optic's objective lens, leaving a hairline crack across the glass. Her first instinct was to curse the damage. Her second was to be grateful the bullet hadn't hit metal or bone. She blinked against the blood trickling from a cut at her temple and shifted her grip. The crack would distort part of her view later, but not all of it. She could work around it. She'd worked around worse. As she climbed, the radio net grew weaker, the jammer's influence stronger with line of sight. Voices faded, came back in fragments. Medic, pressure, losing, assault element near truck, no air until... She clung to a small ledge, chest heaving, snow swirling around her, and for a heartbeat the wind up here sounded like another place's wind. Hotter, dustier, carrying different smells. A narrow alley, a rooftop, the aching weight of a rifle on her shoulder as she watched a man with a rifle move toward her team's position. A child darting into the line of fire at the worst possible moment, chasing a ball. Shouts in a language she could barely follow. The tightness in her chest as she squeezed the trigger anyway, because waiting meant letting her squad take the bullet instead. The report, the bodies, the silence that followed, heavier than any storm. Months later, the murmured questions in corridors, the words unfortunate collateral in reports that tasted like ash, the reassignment orders that moved her quietly to a unit that needed a sniper but not the baggage of her name. Hana closed her eyes against the memory. The wind slapped her awake, real and cold. She opened them again to the ice, to the here and now. Not today, she told herself, barely a whisper. Not like that. Every round counts. Every round honest. She pulled herself higher. Eventually, the angle eased. The chute narrowed, then spat her out onto a narrow shelf close to the ridgeline. From here, the bowl below was hidden by a lip of rock, but the backside of the enemy's position began to unfold. She flattened herself against the stone, inching forward until she could peer around a jut of rock. On the far side of the ridge, not 30 meters away and slightly below her, a small clearing of hard-packed snow held a cluster of figures and equipment. A portable jammer sat on a tripod, cables snaking to a power pack. Beside it, a man with a headset and tablet barked terse updates. Another figure in heavier gear, posture authoritative, pointed and gestured toward the valley, issuing orders. A camera on a tripod stared down into the bowl, its lens black and unblinking, angled to capture the convoy dying against the snow. The ridge itself masked the exact position of the sniper from her view, but she could see the spotter, lying prone behind an odd-looking optic with more glass than barrel, relaying adjustments and calling out corrections. Beyond them, in the creeping whiteness of the squall, she saw more movement. The assault team she'd glimpsed through the valley haze. They were closer to the signals truck now, using rocks and folds in the terrain as cover as they worked their way toward the prize. The hard case on one man's back confirmed it. They weren't just here to kill. They were here to take. Hana slid into the shallow depression the snow offered, body aligning with the ridge, rifle coming off her back with careful movements. She checked her magazine. The numbers weren't comforting. She'd had to carry light to make the climb. Reyes, she whispered into her mic, hoping the jammer's teeth weren't too sharp up here. This is Whisper. I'm on the North Ridge, backside. I have visual on their support elements and some of their assault team. Still no direct line on the shooter, but I can hurt the people who make him dangerous. Static chewed the edges of her words, but his reply came through, thin and strained. Copy. Go. Targets your discretion. We'll pressure when we see effect. She settled her rifle into the snow, adjusting for the slight slope, shifting her cheek well to account for the spiderweb crack in her glass. The position was tight. A wrong move would send her sliding into view of the very people she was here to kill. She exhaled slowly. The world narrowed to the circle of her optic and the beat of her heart. She wasn't counting bodies. She was thinking in ladders, what to cut first so the rest collapsed. Spotter, jammer, machine gun, rockets, brain, one shot at a time. The next mortar round from the enemy's tube arced lazily toward the bowl. She counted its rhythm, how long between launch and impact. When she felt its detonation in her chest, she moved. Her crosshairs rested on the spotter first. He lay comfortable, professional, face half hidden by scarf and goggles, finger resting lightly on his radio's push-to-talk. Beside him, the complex optic glinted faintly. Hana waited for the mortar's blast to bloom in the valley, the sound washing up the ridge like thunder. As it rolled over her, covering any lesser crack, she pressed the trigger. Her shot broke with the explosion. The spotter's head snapped sideways, then slumped into the snow. His hand twitched once against the radio, then stilled. A tremor of confusion passed through the little clearing. Heads turned. The commander barked a question. The jammer operator looked around, trying to see where the threat had come from. No one looked up. People rarely did. Hana was already shifting, riding the recoil, sliding her crosshairs to the man with the headset standing by the jammer. A cable led from his equipment to the squat, ugly box. His mouth was open, half-formed words on his lips. She squeezed off a second shot. He staggered as if shoved, then toppled backward into the jammer, dragging cables and equipment with him. The tripod wobbled. The power pack flipped. Down in the signals truck, Ortiz flinched as a sudden squeal of noise cut across his headset, then died. For a heartbeat, everything was silent. He tapped the side of his gear, wondering if it had finally given up the ghost. Then, faintly, gloriously, a voice came through. "Saber Actual, this is Avalanche. We read you weak, but readable. Say again your situation. Over." Ortiz's eyes went wide. "We're back in business," he breathed. "Sir, I've got them. Don't sneeze at anything, but they're there." Reyes didn't dare hope, but hope came anyway, cold and sharp. "Avalanche, this is Saber Actual, troops in heavy contact," he said quickly. He rattled off the grid as precisely as he could. "Enemy sniper in support on ridges north and east. Valley is a kill zone. Jammer recently compromised. Request immediate air on ridge positions." Marking with smoke. The line crackled, threatened to die, then steadied. "Saber Actual, Avalanche copies all. We're diverting assets. ETA unspecified. Jamming still in play, but we are coming. Hold if you can. Out." On the ridge, Hana shifted again. Her scope swept to the left, where the machine gun team lay entrenched behind a rock lip, their muzzle cutting bright lines through the valley's air. Every time someone in the bowl moved a meter toward the wounded, their rounds chased them back. The gunner hunched behind the weapon, finger clamped on the trigger, eyes narrowed. The assistant fed the belt, glancing occasionally toward the commander for direction. Hana took the gunner first. The shot hit center mass, but from this height the angle drove it through lung and spine in an instant. He collapsed into his own weapon, finger jerking, muzzle spitting ashort, while burst into the sky. The assistant jerked back, eyes wide, scrambling for the grip. She took him too, a fraction of a second later, before he could bring the barrel back down. Down below, Cade saw the machine gun go silent, its muzzle drooping. For a half-second, he didn't believe it. Then he saw the window. "Go," he yelled. "With me. Go now." He surged from cover, grabbing the nearest soldier and hauling them into motion. Snow pounded under boots as they sprinted toward the medic and his patient. Rounds still snapped from other angles, but the left ridge was quiet, at least for a terrifying, beautiful moment. "Keep their heads down," Reyes bellowed, firing in controlled pairs at the right ridge, trusting in volume where precision failed. Cade slid on his knees the last meters, reaching out with one arm to grab the medic's collar and wrench him toward the relative safety of a dent in the ground. Another soldier grabbed the casualty's harness. Together, they dragged both men, boots carving trenches, grunting with effort. Rounds smacked into the snow inches away. One grazed Cade's sleeve, tugging at his arm. He ignored it and pulled. They tumbled behind cover as another band of fire lashed the area they'd just vacated. The medic lay, gasping, blood seeping from a crease in his shoulder, but he was alive. His patient still bled, but now hands could reach him without being immediately punished. From her perch, Hana saw figures move and knew they'd made it. It gave her something solid to hang on to as she swung her rifle to the right, searching for the next threat. Near a jagged rock, she saw the rocket team adjusting their launcher, one fighter sighting up, the other feeding a warhead into place. Their line pointed straight at the signals truck. She had no time for finesse. She broke the first one with a round to the chest, then snapped to the second, taking him in the neck as he tried to swing his launcher away. The rocket slipped from his hands, clattering uselessly into the snow. On the ridge, the commander finally understood the pattern. Bodies didn't fall like this without an unseen force behind them. His gaze, wary and sharp, scanned not just the bowl now, but the high ground beyond. He shouted into his radio, words clipped. Two fighters broke off, turning and scrambling toward a narrow path that led toward Hana's side of the ridge. At the same time, someone pulled a small quadcopter drone from a pack, tossed it into the air, and sent it buzzing upward, its tiny rotors spinning hard. Its camera blinked as it climbed, hunting. The enemy didn't like ghosts. They hunted them. "Be advised," Hana said quietly. "They're sending climbers. In a drone. Can you relocate?" Reyes asked. She shifted her weight carefully, feeling the soft edge of the snow under her torso. "Not far," she said. "Positions limited. I'll have to make the next shots count." The first warning round from the enemy's side hit the rocket handspan from her rifle, spraying her with chips and fresh powder. She flinched, then settled again, heart hammering. A second round hit higher, probing. Through her cracked optic, she could now see the drone, a small, ugly insect against the white, rising in a lazy helix toward where she lay. Once it spotted her, every gun on the ridge would have a coordinate. She could keep hammering at the fighters, maybe take a couple more. Or she could swat the eye that would bring all their rifles to her. The choice wasn't a real one. She tracked the drone instead, compensating instinctively for its erratic movement. It bobbed in the gusts, drifting, correcting. She let it by a fraction, exhaled, and pressed the trigger. The round clipped a rotor. The drone jerked, spun wildly, and then cartwheeled down toward the snow, smashing itself to pieces against the ridge halfway down. "That's my girl," Cade muttered in awe, watching the little black shape fall. On the enemy side, someone shouted in anger. The commander swore into his radio, gesturing furiously. The two climbers pushed harder, boots slipping as they scrambled for elevation. Hana checked her magazine. Not many rounds left. She rolled her tongue against the inside of her teeth, thinking fast. She couldn't kill them all. She didn't need to. She needed to break the brain. Her gaze found the commander again. His body language was unmistakable. The way he stood a half step forward, the way others glanced at him before moving, the radio at his shoulder. He was too close to the sniper's hide for comfort, but there was no other option. She let her heart rate slow, artificially forcing her breathing into a pattern. The world shrank again. Snow, manscope, wind. He leaned in toward the spot where the sniper's body was half hidden by rock, shouting something that carried faintly on the wind. She compensated for the angle, for the wind's pressure on this side of the ridge, for the crack in her glass. She thought, for a heartbeat, of the village square far away, of a shot that had threaded through the wrong space, hitting the wrong flesh. "Not today," she whispered again. She took the shot. The commander's torso jolted, as if someone had pulled his harness from behind, then folded. He dropped, radio jerking off his shoulder, voice cut mid-command. He slid down the slope a meter before friction caught him. For a second, the ridge went still. Then chaos. Without the commander's voice, the careful cadence of fire began to unravel. Machine gun bursts became uneven, panicked. Mortar rounds landed farther short. Some fighters kept firing at nothing in particular. Others started to pull back instinctively, feeling the shift in the air that comes when an advantage suddenly, inexplicably disappears. Down below, Reyes listened to the pattern with his ears and his bones. He heard the change. "That's it," he snapped. "That's the break. Everybody, shift positions. Get off the center of this damned bowl. Cade, pivot your squad to the south flank. Ortiz, keep that link alive. We're not dying in place today." Soldiers who had been flattened into the snow for what felt like hours pushed up, moved in short, controlled rushes, bounding between cover, no longer pinned by perfectly timed shots. They dragged ammo, wounded, whatever they could carry. The valley floor was still dangerous, but it was no longer a slaughter line. It was now terrain they might be able to use. Above, Hannah saw the two climbers again, closer now, faces set. They were coming for her. She could hear their shouted words now, not enough to understand, but enough to feel their intent. She still didn't have a direct view of the sniper. He dug himself into a pocket of rock just under the ridge's lip, invisible from the bowl and mostly shielded from her angle. But as the wind shifted, something odd caught her eye. A line in the snow near the lip, almost invisible, where powder seemed to sink and rise in a repeated pattern. Just beyond it, a tiny patch of ice that never frost-fogged like everything around it, as if something warm beneath was keeping it clear. Heat. From a body. From a barrel. From breath. No one else was looking at that. They were looking at muzzle flashes and silhouettes. She was watching for the negative space, the way the environment reacted to a presence. Her past mistake whispered in the back of her mind. She listened to it and adjusted. The climbers closed in on her, moving low and fast, rifles up. If she took one of them first, the other might get close enough to make this a knife fight. If she wasted a round on flesh that wasn't the key, she might miss her only chance at the one shot that would end this. She ignored them, just for a moment, trusting the ridge's angle to keep her mast. She fixed her crosshairs on that unfrosted patch and the faint shimmer above it. She waited until nothing else was moving near it. She waited until the climbers were at the edge of her hearing, not her sight. She waited an extra half-second past when her nerves told her to fire. Clean line. Clear responsibility. Then she put a round through the shimmer. The bullet punched into rock with a solid thunk. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a rifle slid out of nowhere, as if the mountain itself had spat it out, clattering down the slope. An armored arm followed, then a leg. A body, limp, tumbled after, bouncing and rolling, leaving streaks in the snow as it went. The climbers froze. Their heads snapped toward the falling form. One of them swore, a word she understood in any language. In that instant of shock, Hana rolled sideways, breaking her silhouette, and fired twice more. Both climbers fell before they could decide if they still believed in their mission. The ridge, suddenly without its sniper, its commander, its jammer, and its machine gun, fractured. A few fighters tried to hold position. Most didn't. Under fire from below, subjected now to the same geometry they'd used, they began to break contact, sliding and running downslope, some discarding weapons for speed. In the valley, Cade laughed once, a short, disbelieving sound. "He's down," he said over the net. "You see that? He's down." "I copy," Reyes said. There was exhaustion in his voice, but also a hard edge of something like pride. "All units, maintain pressure on fleeing elements. Do not overextend. We're not chasing them into their own trap, now that we've escaped ours." Snow kept falling. Gunfire crackled less and less. The valley, which had been a screaming, echoing box of death, slowly came back to its native sound. Wind, the occasional clank of cooling metal, the subdued voices of men and women counting who was left. By the time the helicopter arrived, late but not too late, the valley had settled into a different kind of quiet. The birds' rotors beat at the snow, sending spirals and flurries into the air as it hovered, and then settled on a relatively flat patch of ground. Medics in brighter vests than the standard uniforms poured out, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who stepped into other people's bad days as a job. The platoon's own medic, now with a bandaged shoulder and fresh lines of exhaustion carved into his face, gave a terse handover on his patient before being pushed toward the helicopter himself. The wounded rifleman he'd refused to leave lay on a stretcher beside him, chest rising more steadily now. As the bird lifted, taking its precious cargo toward better lights and cleaner tools, the squad on the perimeter watched in a kind of dazed silence. For long minutes, none of them had believed that helicopter would ever come, that this valley would ever be anything but a grave. Hannah's arms trembled as she lowered herself from the ridge's backside, moving more carefully on the way down than she had on the way up. The adrenaline that had carried her up had burned itself out, leaving muscles that shook with each controlled step. When she finally reached the valley floor again, snow crunching under her boots, she felt smaller than she had at the top. The bowl was the same, but it felt different now that the angles had shifted. Heads turned as she approached. Men who had shared jokes with her that morning and barely glanced at her during the briefing now watched her with something like open curiosity. A few pushed away from cover and walked toward her. Cade met her halfway. His face was streaked with soot, and there was a new line of blood along his sleeve, the bullet graze he'd ignored. "You're insane," he said quietly. "I got bored," she replied, voice hoarse. Climbing seemed more interesting than lying down. He snorted. Then, more seriously, he reached out and squeezed her shoulder, fingers digging into the fabric of her jacket. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. Inside a hastily repurposed corner of the signals tent, lit by a bare bulb and the glow of screens, officers hovered over a folding table bearing capture gear. The camera was there, its memory card already half pulled. Maps lay spread out, annotated in a neat, unfamiliar hand with patrol routes, relay locations, call signs. A paper list of targets in another language had been hastily translated and scribbled over. Ortiz pointed at a notation beside the symbol for their relay. "That's the crypto module," he said. "They mapped it. They knew exactly what was in this truck. An intelligence specialist traced another line with his pen. And this, he said, tapping a date, this is the schedule. That's today. That's our outgoing time. This wasn't them getting lucky. Someone fed them our movement. Contracted drivers, maybe. Local worker at the depot. Someone who sees columns leave and arrive. So we've got a leak, Reyes said. His voice was flat. It wasn't their problem to solve in this tent, not today, but it would be someone's problem soon. Their plan was twofold. The intel man went on. Get eyes on a coalition unit walking willingly into a perfect kill zone. Film the whole thing for recruitment and propaganda. Then strip this truck for its encryption hardware so they can start shaping future battles. He flicked the memory card with his fingernail. That camera would have given them a nice, cinematic angle. Glad we ruined their shot list, Cade said from the doorway. They turned as Hana stepped in. Rifle slung, face clean to the worst of the blood, but still bearing a faint line near her temple where the fragment had kissed her. She looked smaller without snow around her, but the room still seemed to subtly adjust to encompass her. Corporal, the intel officer said, we're compiling a full picture of what happened. Lieutenant says you took out their spotter, their jammer, their machine gun, their RPG team, their drone, their commander, and their sniper. That accurate? Not in that order, she said. Reyes gestured to a folding chair. Sit, he said, before you fall down. She sank onto it, legs grateful. Walk us through how you found the sniper. The intel man said, notebook poised. Specifically, Hana glanced at the map on the table at the line of the ridge. She pictured the patch of ice, the faint shimmer. I couldn't see him directly, she said. He was below the lip, but the environment around him knew he was there. Meaning, the snow near his position looked wrong, she said. There was a line where powder collapsed repeatedly, like someone was shifting weight there over time. And just above that, a patch of ice that stayed clear when everything else frosted over in the wind. Heat from his body, or from his barrel, was just enough to keep it bare. You don't get a clean line of frost shadow like that without a source. The intel officer scribbled, nodding slowly. Reyes leaned back, watching her over steepled fingers. You waited until there was no one else behind that line, he said. It was not a question. She met his gaze. I waited longer than was comfortable, she admitted. I delayed the shot until I could be sure nothing else moved into that space. The climbers were closing. If I'd taken one of them first, I might have lost the window on him. If I'd rushed the shot like she stopped, jaw tightening. Like in the village, Reyes said quietly. The tent was suddenly very still. Cade shifted by the doorway. Sir, Hana said, voice rougher. That was in the report. I didn't think it needed to be revisited. The board read your file, he replied. But I hadn't heard it from you. She stared at her hands for a moment, gloved fingers resting on her knees. When she spoke, the words came slower. I took a shot that day to stop a man with a rifle from killing my team, she said. He went down. So did a child I didn't see in the background. There were angles I didn't account for, distractions I thought I could ignore. I misread the space between. She looked up, eyes dark. I swore after that I'd never take a shot I wasn't willing to carry forever, she said. When I saw that shimmer today, I knew, if I was wrong, I'd be the one who put a round into the wrong body again. I decided I'd rather risk myself than rush the shot to save my own skin. Reyes regarded her for a long moment. Today, he said slowly, every round you fired was cleaner than anything any manual could demand. Every man and woman in that valley owes their pulses to the fact that you didn't let fear make you hurry or guilt make you freeze. He allowed a flicker of wryness to touch his mouth. Command may have moved you quietly off the front of the roster, he went on. But if they read this report right, they're going to have a hard time justifying leaving Whisper anywhere except exactly where the danger is. She huffed a small breath. They're going to hate that call sign in the paperwork. They can live with it, he said. We just did. Outside, the platoon gathered in loose knots, some sitting on ammo boxes, some leaning against vehicles. The intel officer stepped out of the tent with a sheaf of forms and began reading from a preliminary commendation, voice carrying over the murmuring. For extraordinary heroism and decisive action under fire, resulting in the preservation of the unit and critical communications infrastructure. The words rolled over Hana like a distant wave. She heard them, but what stayed with her more was the way the soldiers around her looked at her differently now. It was in the subtle things, the direction their bodies leaned, the fact that when someone said the word sniper, they glanced at her first, not toward some vague idea of someone else. Later, when the sun dipped and turned the snow into a field of gold and blue, the air grew sharper again. Repair crews clanged and shouted around the damaged vehicles. Ortiz sat in his truck, coaxing life back into his temperamental equipment. The relay dish on the ridge above them stood silent but intact, waiting for its next stream of invisible connections. Hana sat on a crate near the base of the relay, rifle across her lap. She stripped it with careful, practiced movements, checking each piece, cleaning away the day's residue. The small nick on her optics glass caught the fading light, a tiny flaw in an otherwise flawless circle. Her shoulders ached. Her fingers were clumsy with tiredness. She cleaned anyway, because that was what you did. You maintained the tools that had just carried you and your people through other people's plans. The radio on the crate beside her hissed, occasionally with background chatter. Logistics updates, medical status reports, higher commands clipped voices trying to fit this valley story into their broader understanding of a war that looked different from every angle. Leak likely via local contract, someone was saying. Need to audit all movement schedules. This was precise, not opportunistic. She let it wash over her. That was for other people now. Her job, for the moment, was smaller and more immediate. Make sure the next time she shouldered this rifle, it would be ready. A young private on perimeter duty, voice tight with the particular nervousness of someone who had nearly died once already today, cut into the net. Saber Actual, this is Saber 3-3, he said. Possible movement on the far ridge, north-northwest. Probably just the wind, but I'd rather not assume again. Over. The net held its breath for a second. Reyes's reply came, calm and sure. Copy, 3-3. Hold position. Whisper, 3, you got this. Hana snapped her rifle back together with a final decisive click. She rose, slinging it, and picked up the handset. Whisper, 3 copies, she said, the words fitting more easily now. Send me your bearing. She walked a few steps away from the crate, boots crunching softly in the snow, and brought the rifle to her shoulder once more. Through the optic, crack and all, the ridge came into view, wind combing the snow there into shifting patterns. She watched for the wrongness in those patterns, for lines that didn't belong, for patches that stayed clear when they shouldn't. She watched with the eyes of someone who knew the cost of being wrong, and who carried those ghosts not as weights dragging her down, but as anchors keeping her honest. Behind her, the valley they'd almost died and spread out like a memory already starting to cool. Vehicles, some scarred and bent, some untouched, sat in small clusters. Men and women moved between them, tiny figures in a vast landscape, their movements purposeful and tired. The mountains loomed on all sides, ancient and indifferent. They had seen countless storms and skirmishes, likely would see countless more. They did not care who came and went across their faces. But for one quiet stretch of time, for one long, frozen day, they had been held by a woman whose name most of these people hadn't known when the sun came up. Now, when someone needed a problem solved at ridiculous distance, they reached for her call sign like it was the most natural thing in the world. The wind gusted, carrying with it the faint echo of earlier gunfire and shouted commands, half ghosts now. They faded into the broader murmur of mountain sound. Hana tracked the ridge, steady, patient, in a place where no one was supposed to be able to reach the sniper. She had climbed where the map said no one would go, and from there, she had bent the valley back into something survivable. If the snow remembered anything when the tracks and blood faded, it would remember that a lone figure, small against the sky, lying still behind glass and steel, answering when a desperate voice on a fraying net called a name most of them had forgotten. They'd said it once, half as a joke, half as a last hope. She'd answered, and she wasn't done answering yet.